Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. I'm just getting up for the day. I know I missed my Friday show, so in lieu of that, I'm going to do this. It probably won't be a very long stream, but I'm going to cover some different issues that I intended to cover on Friday, but really didn't get an opportunity to because I had to go to sleep. I had stayed up quite a long time before then. Um, my last video that I did really actually hit on a lot of very, very good points. Now, there's been some recent developments, and those developments have to do with the situation over there in Eastern Europe. Well, the Russians in the eastern part of that country over there that they've annexed are digging in, and they're digging in quite well, especially around Kherson. So they're preparing for keeping these Ukrainian forces quite busy there. So they're going to continue to goad them into fighting, and as they've been doing now for this entire limited incursion, but they're about to expand it into a full scale invasion, as I've said in the last several lives I've done. Now, everybody's talking about this Mart Law situation over there. It's not for all of Russia. It's for the annexed territories in that country that they annexed in Ukraine. So what they're doing is they're basically ensuring the security of those territories by making sure that saboteurs and spies and elements like that will have a much more difficult time messing with the bringing those the reconstruction. I'll just say the messing with the reconstruction of those territories because they're very damaged from all the years of fighting. Now you have to remember that this thing has been actually going on now for 8 whole years since 2014. So there's been really a conflict there for 8 entire years. So if you can imagine, then you can imagine how war torn that part of that country is. Now remember, the Russians annexed that, so they've annexed it. It's now technically formally a part of Russia. So the fact that Ukraine wants those territories back and continues to fight there has given Russia the casus belli that it needs, the cause of war, for them to do the full scale invasion. That's another reason why they're going to do this full scale invasion. Now, remember, I had said my personal estimate for this is about between 2 weeks and a month. It could be a little longer, but really, all in all, since they mobilized those 300,000 reserves, it's the 300,000 reserves they've mobilized, they are building up massive forces in both the Belgorod area in Russia, but also in the southern border regions of Belarus on the border there with Ukraine. Now, what they're going to do, of course, is they're going to attack in multiple prongs of attack. The Russian general, I guess I'm going to try and pronounce his name. I hope I do it right. Uh, Surovikin, I guess Surovikin. He is going to be commanding the entire operation. I hope I didn't butcher his name. Some of those Russian names. But anyways, he's going to be commanding the entire operation. I don't know why they call him the Doomsday General. I mean, people that talk about this guy call him the Doomsday General. He's not in command of any sort of like nuclear weapons, so it's not he's not really like a Doomsday General. He's more like a ass kicking type of general with conventional armies, because that's what he's going to be commanding is conventional forces. Now what they're going to do is he's a very aggressive type of general. He's very well versed in offensive wars operations, and what he's going to do is he's going to go in there and he's going to finish them off. And 300,000 troops in addition to what they've already got in eastern Ukraine is, well, I guess you could say now Russia. I mean, they've annexed these areas, and they're trying to better establish them, and inducting them into Russia. They're trying to rebuild these areas. That's why there's martial law there. So, in addition to the forces that they have there, which is, those 70 combat battalions, and by now, I'm sure they're reinforcing those. And I'm sure the LPR and DPR forces are going to be kept until at least the end of this conflict, because that's just, added manpower, the proxy forces. But in addition to what they have there in the east, these 300,000 additional troops are an enormous force to contend with. And NATO does not, I repeat this, NATO does not have the offensive capabilities to actually go in there and actually be able to conduct any sort of offensive operations. They do not have that. Now, I've heard people saying, oh, well, this unit's getting ready and training to fight Russia, or that unit's getting, sent here or there. Well, you know what? All they would be they'd be speed bumps, road bumps, speed bumps, whatever you want to call them. That's all they would be. These units that can be rapidly deployed, such as airborne units, those are light units. They're not made to contend with heavy forces, heavy armored formations. Let me put this into perspective for you. Okay, do you know how big a division is? One division? One division can be as big as 12 to 16,000 troops. One division, 12 to 16,000 troops. Like the smaller end is 12,000, bigger end is about 16,000. So here's the deal with that. You have one division going over there, and you have 300,000 Russians. 300,000. So you got maybe one or two. Well, let's say, because there's already a few in Europe, we'll say you got like 3 or 4 divisions. So like several divisions, 3 to 4. You've got several divisions, which would be, it would be anywhere between 48,000 to about, 62,000. Okay. So you've got that, and then you've got these European armed forces that are woefully unprepared to fight any kind of war. I told you about how horrible the Europeans were many, 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 many times in my past lives, so I don't have to go over all that again. The European militaries, not one of them is at a high readiness standard. Not one of them is going to be able to take on the Russians. Not a single one of them. And Germany, surprisingly, well, they at least they were until they shot themselves in the foot with these sanctions that boomeranged back on them and the other European countries. But Germany was the biggest economy in Europe until all of this happened. Now there's no excuse for Germany to have neglected their military for so long. Because back in the 90s at reunification, Germany, relative to the size of their country, Germany, when East and West Germany reunified into one, they had a massive military relative to the size of their country. It was with reserves and bringing when they amalgamated, when they inducted the old East German army into the West German army, when they amalgamated, they had a lot of artillery, they had a lot of tanks, they had a lot of everything. Really, they had a lot of helicopters, they had a lot of fighter jets, ground attack aircraft. They had, a pretty sizable navy. It was pretty big. They had about 1 million men. If you take the East and West German armies and the reserves and everything into account, they had about 1 million men. And now they're about like 1/10 the size of that. And that's if you include reserves and everything else, it's close to about maybe 1/5. But really, that's not very big. That's their entire force, everything. And they have neglected it horribly. They have horribly neglected these forces. They have let their weaponry just, sink into disrepair. Like they don't spend the money to repair their equipment. They just let it sit around and just in disrepair. They don't use most of it. I mean, we're talking like half of their tank fleet is not repaired and ready to fight. And Germany has this puny tank fleet now, and they've given away quite a bit of their vehicles that they had in storage because Ukraine is the one asking for weapons. Russia doesn't have to ask nobody for weapons. They have these enormous stockpiles of artillery shells, plus they can manufacture quite a few of them per year. They have so many missiles, and they've been using a lot of missiles too. They have so many missiles that they could actually shoot about 200 missiles a day, and for every day they could shoot 200 missiles a day for every day, and it would take them about 6 months to run out of missiles from now if they did that every single solitary day. Russia has enormous stocks of missiles and shells. Really, they could probably go even longer than 6 months if they shot 200 missiles every day, because they have the ability to manufacture quite a few missiles per year. I mean, they can manufacture enormous amounts of missiles and shells and bullets and everything else. They're not running out of anything. All the way back in, March, April, May, they kept saying, oh, Russia's running out, Russia's running out, Russia's running. Well, they got caught in a lie because Russia's still going. And because they got caught in a lie, they have to manufacture all these BS narratives about Russia having to go ask North Korea for shell. Are you kidding me? Are you freaking kidding me? Going to ask North Korea for shells. You got to be out of your mind. North Korea doesn't even have 1/8 of the manufacturing capacity for armaments that Russia has. It's totally ludicrous. On its face, it's ludicrous. These media narratives are all bunk. They're ridiculous. It's anybody that believes these narratives is a fool because they don't know how to go and do independent research. They don't understand these enormous stockpiles that Russia's sitting on. If Russia did have to ask anybody for help, oh, by the way, Russia has the second biggest military industrial complex in the world after China. It's Russia manufactures. They have a greater output than we do because we closed down a lot of our factories and because we only have really like 14 or so large military complexes left, and the rest of it is relatively small, like these cottage industry sized factories, I call them. They're like the size of maybe like a large warehouse, like these distribution warehouses, or like a big garage. Like that's what I mean when I say a cottage industry. So we have these cottage industry sized, factories where we manufacture things, and they don't have the output that the Russians or Chinese have. China has over 500 enormous factory complexes. That the Lima, Ohio tank factory. We have one tank factory. One. We only have one tank factory. China has many tank factories because they have 500 plus total enormous factory complexes that manufacture all sorts of different weapons and ammunition and missiles. In Russia, they have 300 large factory complexes. It's not as many as China, but they have 1,000 cottage industry sized complexes that manufacture a whole plethora of different items relating to the armed forces. So here's the deal. If Russia was doing so poorly on manufacturing armaments, they would have gone to China for help, not North Korea. So that's flat on its face. That's lunacy. But they don't have to go to China for help because Russia can manage on their own. They're sitting on massive stockpiles of weapons, and just massive stockpiles, USSR era manufactured weapons and 1994 and on manufactured Russian weapons that came out of Russia's independent arms industries once the USSR had collapsed and Russia came out of that collapse. They had a few years of turmoil, but you started to see new projects start coming back online, and you started them seeing manufacturing armaments again by about 1994 and onward. Like you saw the new Kornet missile come out in 1994. That's a Russian anti-tank missile that has had great success, by the way, at destroying Abrams tanks that the Saudis used by the Houthi militias in Yemen. The Houthis were destroying these Abrams tanks left and right. They were setting up very careful ambushes, and they were hitting them from the side and from the back with these Kornet missiles, and side hits were destroying them. So evidently that means the armor on the side of these Abrams are not tough enough to withstand a side hit from a Kornet, because a Kornet is a tandem charged warhead where there's a shape charge to blow a hole through the tank, and then after that the explosive goes off, and that's what kills the crew inside and destroys the tank, basically. So it disables everything, and you're going to blow out the ammunition racks that are in the back of the tank and everything once that charge goes off. So these Kornets are highly effective, and there's over twice as many Kornets that were manufactured in Russia. Also, Iran builds them by license because that's who gave the Houthis these arms, was Iran. They built the same Kornet missiles by license, and they had made sure to supply the Houthis with them because Iran props up the Houthis. That's a proxy of Iran. So the Russians have produced well in excess of over 2 times what we have with our javelins, and we have given away a lot of the javelins to Ukraine. A massive number of them, nearly all of them. We really don't have that many left. It would be like maybe in the few thousands range. We have given away massive amounts of javelins. We've also given them other anti-tank missile systems, everything from TOW missiles to, the old LAW systems, AT-4s. You name it, we've given it to them if it has to do with anti-tank systems. So, we've really, really depleted ourselves. And, we've also given away now over a third of all our rocket artillery ammo. We've given away 2 million artillery shells, which is nearly all of our shells. That's like 2/3 of all our artillery shells, both the 105 millimeter and the 155. So that's an enormous amount of shells just to give it away. I mean, it's a freakish amount of shells. So we've really shot ourselves in the foot in every possible conceivable way. And China has cut us off. They've cold cut us off from a lot of the chips and electronic components that we require to build these more advanced type of weapons, because we don't produce them ourselves. We're dependent on our enemy for systems that give them a backdoor in. They give them a backdoor in. So I'm going to see who's in the chat here before I continue. Hey, LCJC. Great to see you. I guess you're the only one in the chat. Well, welcome. So we've shot ourselves in the foot by giving away all of these weapons. So what are we going to fight with? What are we, I mean, so every time I see these stories about them saying they're training up our new woke military, because I was a part of the old military, the professional military. We used to be professionals. 10 years ago, but then they ruined our military. They turned it woke, and they're inducting them into all this green garbage and everything else. They can't even properly train anymore, because if they want to do live ammunition trainings, there's not enough ammunition for the live ammo trainings. They have to save all the live ammo for other missions, like actual combat missions, because we've given away so much of our stocks. That's been a problem now for the past few years. I mean, in the last few years, they've really ran it into the ground. I mean, it's as bad as it could possibly be right now. So when I see them talking about, training a unit here or training a unit there to fight the Russians, like a division or a brigade here and there, that's not enough. That's not enough to do anything. It's not enough even to be a speed bump, really, for the Russians. If the Russians wanted to take over all of Europe, they could single-handedly do so. Easily. So when we went into Iraq, for the first 3 weeks, when we went into Iraq, we went in there with 160,000 invading troops across the border from Kuwait into Iraq. So, of course, there were other troops supporting the missions back in Kuwait and Saudi who were like logistical elements or, Air Force elements and the ground crews and so on and so forth. But the actual ground troops that went in there was 160,000 ground troops for the first invasion phase, which was like the first 3 weeks, the invasion. So for Russia to be putting together a 300,000 man invasion force, in addition to their limited incursion force that they went into the east of that country with, Ukraine, that's an enormous invasion force. All in all, that is an enormous invasion force. They're going to take over that whole country, and it will no longer be a sovereign nation. If you really look at some of the things that are being said, like talking about going to Lviv and talking about, Kiev and all this other stuff, Odessa. Yes, they can take all 3 of those cities. But if they took all 3 of those cities, there would be no Ukraine left, because that would stipulate they invaded the whole country. So it has yet to be seen what their actual battle plans are. Like I said in my last live, nobody can know that unless you're in the actual strategy meetings. Like if you're a bug on the wall, if you're like a fly on the wall or an insect in the room, that would be the only way that you would be able to know exactly where they're going to strike, how they're going to do it. how many prongs of attack there's going to be, where they're going to attack, yada yada. So you can't know exactly what they're going to do in advance, but the actions and activities and what they've been saying stipulates that they're going to take over that whole country. It really does. It really does. Because that's an enormous force to be putting together just to attack another nation. 300,000 troops for a country the size of Ukraine after how badly the Ukrainian forces have been ground down to the nub. Yeah, that's going to overrun that country. It's going to overrun them. And nobody is going to intervene to stop it, because if we intervene, that'll be the end of us too. Believe that. It'll be the end of us if we get involved in that formally. Formally. I just don't think that's going to happen. It's too early for that. Because if you look at prophecy, there's a lot of other stuff that has to happen first. We're not going to get involved in that. All this posturing and all this, just all this shit talking, it's not going to happen. We're not going to get involved in that. The only way we would get involved in that would be to send in mercs, more mercs than what there already are, because evidently a lot of the top tier Ukrainian forces are now all foreign mercs because the Ukrainians have lost a lot of their best people. So, I mean, that would be the only way that we would, because if you have to think about it, all the Western equipment that was sent in there, the Ukrainians are not well trained on that stuff. It would take them a lot of time to train on Western equipment. And a lot of these Ukrainians that are left are a lot of old men and, middle-aged men. I mean, they had to use them in a lot of sectors, defensive sectors, because they've already lost the cream of the crop of their armed forces. They've already lost a lot of those young men that were fighting in the east there, because they've either been captured, they've been killed, or they've been, they've deserted, because there's been a lot of desertions, and that's understandable because they're sending them in human wave assaults and things like that, it's a mess. It's a mess. So they're, like I said in my last live, they're on their, seventh, maybe eighth round of mobilizations, and they might have to start mobilizing women soon. I mean, they're in dire straits over there. It's not, things are not going well for them. And that was just in the limited incursion phase of Russia. Now, when Russia does a full-scale invasion, as opposed to the limited incursion that they've already done, they're going to overrun that place. They're going to overrun that place. I think they're going to resurrect the old Russian Empire / Soviet Union, because the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union sat on the same lands. They're going to do it through diplomacy, through war, through coercion. They're going to rebuild the old Russian Empire. But I'm going to switch gears now, because I've already hit on all the key points as it has to do with the situation in Russia. So I'll end it with this. They're going to resurrect the old Russian Empire, and nobody is going to stop them. Nobody is going to step in and stop them, because that would be the end of them if they did. Now, China, switching gears to China, the world superpower, in real terms, in real numbers, in real facts and figures, China is the most powerful nation on earth. They have the biggest conventional forces, and even though they have the third biggest nuclear force, it's the most capable nuclear force in the world, because they have fractional orbital bombardment systems that have been tested and they work now. They've been perfected, they work. They also have several models of hypersonic weapons, as does Russia, but China took it a step further, and they have fractional orbital bombardment systems, which means they can circumnavigate the Earth and hit their target with a hypersonic glide vehicle at the end of the encircling. So at some point, as it's circling, the glide vehicle detaches, and then flies in at an extremely high rate of speed and hits its target. That's how it works. So they have that. It's tested and tried and true. They've tested it a couple different times and they've perfected it. China is the only country known to have tested such a thing. So now they have that. And China has these enormous conventional forces. Enormous conventional forces. Massive. They're massive. And they still have enough nukes to destroy two large countries. So China is still the world's superpower, even having the third largest nuclear arsenal. They don't have to have the biggest nuclear arsenal. It all just has to work. It has to work. And their nuclear arsenal is exceedingly capable. So China, the thumbnail that I picked for this are the Chinese Type 93s. They're nuclear subs, very, very quiet, very capable subs, very dangerous. They've been known to slip past Western ships unnoticed and everything else. I mean, China has a humongous submarine fleet, massive. They have the biggest submarine fleet in the world. They have the biggest navy in the world, and it's the most technologically advanced and capable navy because they have electronic jamming capabilities on many of their ships, as they now do on their aircraft for their Air Force combat fleets. They have electronic warfare systems that the West cannot contend with aboard these ships, on weapon systems and everything else too. They have excellent radars and targeting computer systems and everything else. And how they integrate all these systems is phenomenal. Their navy is the biggest, most advanced navy in the world. And their air fleet, their combat air fleet, although they don't yet, and I say yet, although not yet, they don't have the biggest overall air force, but they still have the biggest combat air fleet in the world, which means they have more combat aircraft than any other air force in the world. They have more combat planes than any other air force, and that's by a humongous margin. By a humongous margin. See, they don't have as many. See, America, we have an enormous air mobility command, which is a lot of different cargo aircraft. We have a massive amount of cargo aircraft. We have a lot of other support aircraft like trainers and AWACS. And, China has all that stuff too. And mid-air refuelers, of course. China has all that stuff too, but they don't have as much of it as we do. But China has a lot more combat aircraft than we do by a humongous margin. They have like 1,150 more combat planes than we have. So China's combat air fleet is enormous, and it's also extremely capable. Their aircraft, like their J-10s, J-11s, J-16s, JF-17s, that that's mostly an export combat aircraft, but they still have about 170 of those. Their J-20 stealth fighters. Then their Navy. Their Navy has the J-15, and they have the the J-31s. The J-31s are the stealth aircraft that they have for their Navy. So they have a stealth fighter for their Navy, which all they did was took an F-22. They took an F-22 and they miniaturized it and modified it. So now they have this extremely capable fighter jet for their Navy. It's a stealth fighter, just like the J-20 is a stealth fighter, but the J-20 was completely indigenously designed in China. That they designed that one themselves. It has no, on the exterior, it has no noticeable designs that look anything like any Western aircraft. So China has two different fighters that are stealth aircraft, fifth-generation aircraft. One's for their Navy and one's for their Air Force. But they also have their new stealth bomber, the H-20 bomber, which is a stealth bomber. And they also have their older H-6Ks, which they've been modified by equipping them with electronic warfare capabilities by putting these KG 600 jamming pods on not only their ground attack aircraft, like their J 16Ds and their uh, JH-7s, they're flying. They call it the Flying Leopard. JH-7s, their ground attack, their primary ground attack aircraft, but they have others. And now they're putting them on their H-6K heavy strategic bombers, so that they can jam enemy radars and targeting systems for air defense and just basically everything. Those jamming pods can shut off entire ships, sort of like the Russian Kirkuk system shut off the Donald Cook in the Black Sea 2 different times, once in 2014 and once again in early 2021. The same ship, same place. It was just the first time was an Su-25, the second time was an Su-24 with these Kirkuk's jamming pods on them. Well, these Chinese KG-600 jamming pods can do very much the same. So they're equipping their heavy strategic bombers with these things as well, much like they did on their Flying Leopard, their JH-7s, and their J-16Ds, which is specifically made to be an attack aircraft, a ground attack aircraft. It's an electronic strike aircraft. It's designed around electronic warfare for the suppression of enemy air defense systems like our Patriot missile systems, so they can fly in there, suppress the radar, fire anti-radar ground missiles at those things, destroy them, and then maybe do some dive bombing operations or drop some laser guided munitions on those same air defense sites. So they're made specifically to suppress air defenses, those JH-16Ds. And then you have the Flying Leopards, the JH-7s, which those are specifically for ground attack missions, where they go in and just do tactical ground attack missions where they hit specific key targets, like any areas of resistance that are in the way of their ground troops is what they hit. They can be used in strategic strikes in massive swarms, where they go in as a swarm, like a whole, couple different squadrons of them, and they go in there and just swarm an area. They can do that too, but they don't really need to because they have their strategic heavy bombers to do that. But they're made mostly for the ground attack role, but their Navy is enormous. Their Navy's enormous. Their combat air fleet's enormous. They have the biggest ground-based missile forces on Earth, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. China has the largest ground-based missile forces on Earth. And they also have the largest amount of naval missiles, too, to go with their enormous Navy. So then, their combat air fleet, of course, would have enormous amounts of ordnances that could be dropped or fired from their combat air fleet. China is massive. They're massive. And their ground forces are enormous because of their huge paramilitary forces, plus their regular military of 4 million, their reserves of 5 million for their military. So they have 9 million for their whole military between their 4 million active military and their 5 million man reserves. Then you have their 20 million man paramilitary. They're parallel military forces. That's why it's called paramilitary. It's like a whole separate other military. So China basically has like two militaries. They have this enormous paramilitary of 20 million. 20 million. Yes, 20 million. And then they have their 4 million man active regular military and their military's reserves of 5 million. So China has 29 million men under arms. 29 million. China's enormous. They have the most gold holdings in the world. They have the most economic influence in the world with their Belt and Road projects that they use to create vassal states, which are nations that cannot pay back the projects, like all the infrastructure projects. Speaking of that, Ranil the leader of Sri Lanka there, you know, I told everybody months ago that there would be a CCP friendly puppet installed in Sri Lanka. Well, I was right because this guy has vowed to continue cooperation with China on all the projects. That's code for okay, I'll obey you, Xi Jinping. You put me in power, I'll do what you want. So I have a pretty damn good track record when it comes to these things, and there we go. There's something I said months ago coming to pass. Regardless of all these different dynamics that were in play in Sri Lanka, the end result is exactly what I said it would be, a CCP friendly puppet being put in power there. They took out the Western friendly puppet that wanted support from the IMF and the West. They got rid of that puppet and they put in a CCP friendly puppet. So I told everybody that would happen, and here it is. It happened. So now, China, with these enormous forces, is Russia's ally and closest ally that you could ever imagine. It's the closest ally you could ever imagine. Now, Russia and China have done massive exercises together for the purpose of creating interoperability of their forces to be able to conduct operations together, like when they invade the United States. All these CCP properties that are inside the United States that are owned by the CCP regime of China, all these CCP properties, China's the biggest single landowner in the United States. They will be based with all these enormous Chinese forces and their allies like Russia. Because China also, before I forget, has forces in Europe. The Chinese armored forces that did exercises in Moscow just mere months ago had been moved further west into Belarus because Russia and Belarus and Serbia and China are all allies. They're all allies. So here's the other thing. China's been also flying nonstop cargo aircraft back and forth between China and Serbia, and that was fairly recently too. That was fairly recently. That wasn't that many months ago. They've been dropping off troops and weapons. Now you saw the Xi Jinping propaganda go up in Serbia recently. The reason for that is because everywhere that Chinese troops go, or everywhere that China controls a vassal state, you're going to see Xi Jinping propaganda. His face, it's almost like Saddam. You see Xi Jinping in a lot of nations around the world now. His propaganda is everywhere because everywhere that his troops go, Xi Jinping goes with them. So in Serbia, Xi Jinping has been sending in forces by cargo aircraft, and we already know that Montenegro couldn't pay back their Belt and Road Highway project or port projects, so China is using their ports to bring in armor and heavier weapons to send it into Serbia. Now, the whole thing that happened with Kosovo and Serbia, you notice that quieted down substantially, don't you? Don't you? So the reason why it quieted down substantially is because there's Chinese troops in Serbia. Nobody's going to attack Serbia right now. They would be out of their mind to attack Serbia right now. Because the Chinese troops are in a strategic position in Europe because they could strike out in all different directions at NATO nations. They can hit Greece, they can hit Italy, they can hit Austria, they can strike even as far north as Poland or Germany. They're in a very good position in Serbia for strategic operations to assist the Russians. So China and Russia, again, are the closest of allies. They're the best of friends. The Chinese are moving into position to help their Russian allies. Even though the Russians could do it all themselves, the Chinese are there to help because they're allies. Just like how the Russians are going to help the Chinese here to invade the United States. The Russians are going to help China to invade the United States, just like China is going to help Russia to steamroll Europe. They're the closest of allies. So China's enormous. And Russia, they're not as big as China. They're nowhere near as big as China. But Russia, yeah, they're still pretty powerful for the size of their forces. For the size of their forces, they're still pretty powerful. They're not as powerful as China, but they're the second overall most powerful. Russia has 3.5 million men under arms. China has 29 million men under arms. Even though Russia is only a tiny fraction of what China is, Russia has 2 million reserves, and they've only mobilized, that we know of, 300,000 of them for this whole Ukraine thing. But if Russia mobilized all their reserves, they would have 2 million additional men to their 1.2 million active forces, and then they also have their 300,000. They call them the National Guard, which is their paramilitary. It's not very big. It's only 300,000, but it's it's basically, it used to be called their internal troops, but they renamed them the National Guard, which is like their paramilitary. So they have 3.5 million under arms when you combine all of that. China has 29 million, but they're going to both help each other to take over the West. The West is going to be destroyed because we don't have the capacity to wage much of a war at all. Even if it's a defensive war, we don't have the capacity to wage war anymore like we used to because we've given away so many of our weapons and we cannot replace them. It would take us many, many years to replace them. And that's under basically optimal, perfect economic conditions, which we don't have. Our supply chain's broken down, and that totally affects the military-industrial complex. So it's all going to fail. It's all failing right now. We cannot replace what we just dumped into that black hole over there in Eastern Europe. We cannot replace it. Giving away all this stuff, and we cannot replace it. We can't. It can't be done. Can't be done. It's impossible. So we have set ourselves up for a massive failure, and we will fail, and we'll fail spectacularly. So we're not going to get involved to try and mess with Russia. We're not going to mess with China, because if we do, that's the end of us. But it's not time for that, because prophetically, we still have to have a collapse, an internal conflict. We have to have, then we get invaded after those other two things happened. And we haven't collapsed yet. So anything you see in the news about, yeah, it's going to be, we're doing this to go against Russia, we're doing this to go against China. Nope, not going to happen. Because Mystery Babylon doesn't even get a shot off. They don't even get a shot off. We get attacked from all sides, and it's a surprise. It's a total surprise when it finally happens. So, all the things you see about us getting involved in conflict, if you believe in your Bible, then you know how things are going to happen. It's a surprise, and Babylon doesn't get a shot off. The United States doesn't get a shot off in any conflict. So, regardless of what you see in the news, don't believe it. Don't believe it. Don't believe a word of it, because there's a bunch of lying narratives out there, and they're all trying to mislead people. They're all misleading people because they don't ever tell you the facts. You have to go and dig the facts up on your own. But you're going to see that Russia is going to come out victorious in Ukraine, of course. That goes without, that's obvious, and it goes without saying. But you're going to see a lot of other things begin to happen. Like you're going to see the Russian Empire / USSR be resurrected. You're going to see Russia and China basically enlarging themselves. They will enlarge themselves, and they're going to be the ones that bring Babylon to its end. Of course, they're going to have their smaller allies in tow with them, like Pakistan, North Korea, Belarus, whoever else. You're gonna see all their and Iran too, and you're gonna see all their smaller allies in tow with them. But the main thing is Russia and China. They're the main powers. China's the number one hegemon superpower. They have 40% of the entire world's manufacturing. They have 40% of the world's whole industrial base in China. They have the biggest military industrial complex on earth. They've added hundreds of factories since they started constructing them in the late 90s. They all came online in addition to what they already had by 2017, 2018. That's when the Pentagon's own supercomputers started projecting us losing every single solitary war simulation to China. We're talking about a supercomputer now that factors in all sorts of different factors. I've dug up a lot of those factors, and that's why I'm telling you what I tell you on this channel. That's why I made entire documentaries showing how badly we would lose and what it would look like on the ground. That's why I am reading my audiobook to people. By the way, I'm going to get back to that here pretty soon. Already got a few parts ready I could read. So I also typed out stories about it in the community tab for those who like to read. All you have to do is scroll back a ways. It's easier if you have a PC or a laptop than it is on a phone, of course, but those stories are there to read. But anyways, I'm getting off track. So basically, on this channel, that is why I warn about the CCP and China and also Russia and the Eastern elites. The Eastern elites, because everybody's looking at these Western elites all the time, but they're not watching. They're watching the left hand, but they're not watching the right hand, which is the Eastern elites. And the Eastern elites are the ones who control China, Russia. Do you know why there's Eastern elites? Because Russia and China have control on their currency. They control their central banks. The banks don't control the government. The government controls the banks in the East. Same with India. They control the issuance of their currency, which means that the elites of the East are in the regimes themselves. And they're all very rich. China has the most billionaires on earth. They also have the biggest middle class on earth. 900 million is China's middle class now. Yes, 900 million are considered middle class in China. And they have the most billionaires. They even have a handful of trillionaires, which are the very top of the CCP, like Xi Jinping and his cronies. So Russia has Putin and a few other massively wealthy billionaires, and maybe even Putin is a trillionaire because of all the assets he has, both hard assets and liquid assets. That man is worth a lot of money. Some have said that he could quite possibly be the richest man on earth. Now that's, speculation, so I can't confirm or deny it, but I would tend to believe it. It's possible, for sure. For sure it's possible. But Russia and China are the obviously the top two most powerful nations on earth right now. And there's nobody that's going to stop them. Nobody. Nobody can stop them. What's our rinky-dink little 2.2 million men going to do? I mean, we have this whole new generation of troops. They're all woke. They're all like indoctrinated into all this BS garbage. I mean, what are they going to do? They don't even train to fight anymore. They have stress cards and they hold up their stress card. Do you think you're going to hold up a stress card in war? You're going to get your hand shot off. You know what? I mean, really. I mean, come on now. They don't train like they used to because they don't have the training ammo for live training like they used to. They're running out of these things. I'm not saying they completely can't do it, but I'm saying that they're very low and they have to budget things accordingly. The military is so broke, they have to put the soldiers on food stamps. How crazy is that? When I was in the Army, I was well paid. That was a well paid career choice when I was in the Army. And now they have to put their troops on food stamps? What in the actual hell is really going on here? The morale is at an all-time low. They've purged a lot of the best people from our military. Our military is depleted. They've given away so much of its weapons to Ukraine. They've also left a whole bunch of them in Afghan and Iraq. And in Iraq, when we left there, formally left there. We still have a little bit of forces there, of course, because of the whole Syria thing. But listen, for us to have left all this hardware, we're talking hundreds of billions in hardware in Afghan and also in Iraq, plus what's been given to Ukraine. It is lunacy. The West has depleted itself. And now we have these newer generations in. They're not as good as when I was in. The guys that I served with, we were professionals. We used to be professionals. And now look at our military. It's hollowed out. It's woke. It's depleted. You've already had a bunch of Air Force pilots walking off the job. All that money spent to train them. All that money and time and energy spent to train them. And they didn't want to take the snake juice. They didn't want to take that toxin. So they walked off the job, Now, these are commissioned officers. They can do that. They can resign because they're commissioned. You have to be a commissioned officer to fly. So they walked off the job. They quit. They quit the military. They all that money and time to train them, and they just walked off the job because they wouldn't take that. You see, you can't do these mandated types of things where you try to get people to do these horrible things, take these horribly invasive things into their bodies or all this other stuff. You can't do that and seriously think that the best people are going to stay, the people that are the most educated, the people that are like the best trained, the people that, they purged all those people. Only the wokesters and the regime fanatical loyalists are the ones that stayed. All the best people got purged. All the best people are gone. They're purged. They're hollowed out. They're thinned out. The morale is at an all-time low. They have to put the troops on food stamps. I remember the Navy, on some of the Navy ships, they cut their meals down to 2 meals a day. 2! What the hell is going on with our military? And then they're dumping all this money over in Eastern Europe. What about Jackson, Mississippi? Aren't they going to fix that? Aren't they going to fix Florida? No. No, they're not. They're going to leave them like they are, and they're talking about evacuating the populations, especially in the circumstance of what happened in Mississippi and Jackson. They're seriously talking about evacuating all those people, resettling them. Remember, that's a sign of a failed state. Massive relocations of populations, whether it's forced or voluntary, that's a sign of a failed state. It's one of the signs. I talked about that in my Failed State Friday show from last Friday. People should really watch that. We are a failed state by most definitions already, and it's going to get worse. Expect it to get worse. All the food shortages. We're in a food and fuel crisis. We're scraping the very bottom of the barrel. This winter is going to be horrible. There's really not going to be nothing left. What'll be left is going to be like you're not going to have the choices that you once had, okay? You're not going to have the opportunity to have the choices that you used to have. You're going to see a lot of things gone from the shelves, and they're going to keep doing this window dressing to make it look like things are better than what they are. And by window dressing, I'm talking about where they're going to be fronting items and where there's none behind them, but you're going to see all these items fronted to the front of the shelves. They're going to space out the shelving more. They're going to use more of those camouflaged cans where they paint the cans on that little flap that they hang over the shelf area to make it look like there's stuff in there. They're going to do all this different window dressing to make things look like it's better than what it is. But remember, there was also a diesel issue because they've sold off so much of our strategic reserve. There's an issue right now with the high prices because we're near the very bottom of our strategic reserve now. We're near the very bottom. We're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Once the diesel runs out, the trains are going to stop running. I think all the rail strikes are more an issue of trying to camouflage the fact that the fuel situation is so horrendous, but that's going to affect the trains and trucking. And trains can pull a lot more freight than trucks can, but even so, once the trains stop, you're going to feel it. And once the trucks stop too, once the trucks stop with the trains, then you're going to know that it's over. This country will come to a standstill. And I do believe this winter is going to be a nasty winter. I mean, I can't say how much time we have left before we fully collapse and descend into the internal conflict. I made a documentary about the internal conflict that everybody should watch, the whole entire thing. It was very well put together. But I don't know how long we have. We could have a year. We could have 2 years. I don't know. I have no idea. I tend to think and believe that it's a lot closer than we realize. I think it's within months. You know, like I said, I could be wrong. Could be a year, could be 2 years. I don't think selections have anything to do with any of that because there's people that still think politics are real. Politics are a globalist, false paradigm, and they have nothing to do with anything anymore because it's all fake. It's like WWF. So just ignore politics, ignore the selections, all that garbage. Look, what's going to happen is we are going to collapse. We're going to have a Syrian-style internal conflict. The old paradigms are going to pass away and fall to the wayside when the internal stuff begins. Because you're going to see new ideologies crop up. Some of them will morph out of the older ones, but some of them will be entirely new ideologies that will crop up. And there will be a new paradigm during the internal conflict. So that is going to get rid of the old globalist paradigms. And like Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the globalists in the West will begin to lose their power during the internal conflict. But they'll lose their final power. The final loss of their power will be when we are invaded by the Chinese and by their Russian allies too, and all their other smaller allies that are in tow with them. So I can't tell you the timing, but I can tell you the order that things happen in. The best metric by which to judge anything you see anywhere, the best metric is this: collapse, internal conflict, then invasion. So when you see people talking about all these crazy narratives about nukes this and whatever that, just know that there's an order to things. There's an order to things. And you can accept or refute whatever you see on the news based on that proper order. Collapse, internal conflict, then foreign invasion. I've said this for the last 2 years. So that's the order, okay? Anything you see in the news, you can judge with that metric the metric I just gave you. The metric I just gave you is how you can judge anything you see to deem whether it's true or whether it's a total bunch of BS and lies. So use that metric. I'm going to greet people here, say my farewells before I get off. It's a pretty good live today. Covered a lot of information in a very short amount of time. Hey, Lorinda. Hey, Romero. What's up, buddy? Good to see you. Hey, Jennifer. Great to see you. Brogan. Hey, wonderful to see you. And Miss Jen. Wonderful to see you, too. And great to see everybody. NLCJC family, welcome. Great to see you, too. I'm glad everybody came. Now, yeah, I mean, the East and the West have their own different plans, Lorinda. See, the West wants to do this bunk BS Great Reset where they rip down their own power base with nothing viable to replace it with. So what they're really doing is just basically destroying everything, but they have nothing to replace it with. So they're going to destroy the West, and then because they destroyed the West, will be exceedingly weak from all the infighting and destruction. And then that's when the Chinese and Russians are going to just basically take over, and they're going to have the easiest time doing it. Like, they're going to have the most minimal losses. See, if you're going to invade somebody, you always want to do it in such a way to where your losses are extremely minimal. You have very small losses. So what better, because the Chinese don't want to fight a counterinsurgency. So what better than to let your enemy descend into an internal conflict, destroy themselves first, have a collapse, let all the most capable people fight each other and, eliminate each other. So that way when you take over, you don't have to worry about fighting a massive counterinsurgency. It makes a lot of sense from that standpoint, why they would wait. You see, in my timeline for the invasion, I show the way it would be if we did not have a civil conflict and a collapse. I just show it like we have bad economic times and then they invade us. There was no civil conflict in my invasion timeline because I wanted to show what a best case scenario. I wanted to show what a best case scenario looked like for America. And the best case is us not having had collapsed and not having had a internal conflict, just a straight up invasion. Now that's a best case, and we still lose horribly because of the new Chinese and Russian fourth generation warfare doctrines. How they just, I used real units, real everything, real equipment, real units. I used it all within the scope of fourth generation warfare doctrines. Like all the different units begin on CCP properties and they're near their objectives, so they can take over very rapidly, very quickly. And I show how their externals come in to aid their Trojans that are also, because fourth generation warfare is when you combine the concept of the Trojan horse with units that are embedded and hidden inside your enemy's nation, plus your externals that blitzkrieg in from the borders and the coasts and parachute in. That's the heavy-handed reinforcements for the Trojans. That's called fourth generation warfare, or also hybrid warfare. Now this video is probably going to get shadow banned just because I said those words. They always do that. They hate this. They hate this channel. They hate this channel. They hate everything I talk about on this channel because I'm saying something that they really don't like. I'm saying things they really, really don't like because all my videos are heavily shadow banned. And my channel is stagnant. It's been stagnant for well over a year. I've had the same numbers. It's hovered within a 50 range, plus or minus 50. But I've had the same numbers for over a year. They don't want people watching this channel because what I'm saying on this channel is narrative busting information. It busts a lot of narratives, and they don't like that. If you speak the truth, you're going to be heavily shadow banned. You're going to be your channel's not going to grow. You're not going to get a lot of views on your videos. So, that's why a lot of my videos really don't even reach 500, 600. I mean, most of them don't. A lot of them are only like 300 to 400 views on average. Some of them reach over 1,000. I mean, but it's very few. It's very, very few. And those were the ones that got shared out by people that had larger channels. But a lot of my stuff is heavily shadow banned. So there's a reason for that. There's a reason for that. So I think that speaks for itself. I think that speaks for itself. So I'm going to say my farewells. I appreciate everybody coming. Hey, Jason. Hey, Jeffrey. Great to see you guys. And Patty, great to see you. Well, you all have a wonderful, blessed day. And thank you for all coming.